Okay, I guess we're good to go over here. So just to give everyone an overview of what to expect for this meeting, should be pretty quick. We'll do just some introductions, talk about why we're having this user group for the Northeast region. It will be followed up with a client demo from Comcast, some Q&A, and then reminders for the event. So again, I'm Claudine Ting, the marketing specialist for client success. We also have at this meeting our director of marketing, Alex Wong, and our director for customer experience and co-founder, Eric Lauer.
Hi there, everybody. Hey, everyone.
To give you an idea of who's attending this morning, first of all, we have Comcast who have spearheaded this initiative. We also have Delta Dental in Pennsylvania, Glen Mead Trust, the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, the Richard and Susan Smith Family Foundation, and the Iola Fund of the State of New York. Okay, so just to give you an idea of the objective of the user group, this is to facilitate networking and an exchange of best practices for SmartSimple users in the Northeast region, particularly the states of New York, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Boston, Vermont, New Jersey, just so that you get to know the SmartSimple users and the community in your backyard. Shelly, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but do you mind just sharing a few words as to what made you think about starting this group?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you to all of the other groups who are attending. So the reason for spearheading this group, and actually I had seen a note that there were other user groups. I think there was a West user group which I attended. But really what I was hoping to get out of it was to really share ideas across our platforms and see, what is it that other folks are doing? And are they doing things that we could borrow? What functionality are they using? How are they using the system? What are the things that they like the most? What are the things that they're struggling with? And are we also struggling with the same things? So it's really just kind of, have an open discussion about how you're using the system and how we can together take those best practices and take them back into our grants management system and just, continuous improvement and continue to make it better. So really that was my goal, and I hope that, that's your goal as well.
Perfect. Yes, and yes, it is our goal, and it's an exciting initiative for us to start these user groups in different areas of the United States and also all over the world. Shelly and Mary, are you guys ready for the client demo?
Yes, I think Mary is going to share.
I'm ready.
Screen.
Okay, so whenever you're ready, just share your screen.
Okay. Great, thank you.
So while Mary is pulling up our slides, I'll just quickly introduce ourselves. So my name is Shelly Smith. I am the Director of Strategic Ops and Giving for Comcast Community Impact. And with me here today is Mary Fotu. She is the Manager of Strategic Ops and Giving, but also our Fearless Database Administrator. So she is the one who is actually going to be digging into the demo and really showing you what we've done so far in SmartSimple. So go ahead and flip to the agenda, Mary. So real quick, what we're going to cover today, we're going to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do, give you a quick overview of what we currently capture and track in SmartSimple. And then I'm going to turn it over to Mary. She's going to talk about some of the advantages and improvements and then go through a quick demo. Really we'll be focusing on 2 to 3 of the key functionalities that we want to share that we feel like are outside of the basic functionalities of SmartSimple. And then talk a little bit about enhancements and challenges. So really that's going to be that open discussion, we're saying, here are the things that, we think is doing well, but here are the things that we're having challenges with, and, has anyone else experienced that, or does anyone have any suggestions or feedback? And then we'll, obviously, we'll open it up for Q&A. But please feel free to ask questions as we go along.
And Shelley, the point where you brought up about questions, feel free to just raise them through the phone, through your computer audio, or you can also send it in the chat box and we can relay the questions to Shelley and Mary. And also, Shelley and Mary, if you have questions on our end, please feel free to raise them with the audience. As this is not just a client demo, but also this is a forum for you to solicit feedback from fellow SmartSimple users in your region, also from us, Alex, Eric, and I.
Great, will do. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So just really quickly about who we are and what we do. So we went live with SmartSimple in January of this year. We actually migrated over from GIFS Alta. For community impact, our funding focuses really revolve around the digital space, so digital inclusion, skills for the digital economy, innovation and entrepreneurship, and then volunteerism and service. Just to give you a general sense of what we do and how much we do, we're looking at around $400 million in cash and in kind annually. Out of that, our foundation is $20 million, and our corporate sponsorships are $11 million. We do have other sponsorships that happen throughout the company. And then we also have our Comcast Cares Day, which is a nationwide volunteer event where 100+ volunteers volunteer across the organization to help nonprofits, to beautify areas, clean up schools and parks and things like that. So what's inside of SmartSimple? What are we currently tracking in SmartSimple? So we have a little bit of a mixed bag. We merged with NBC Universal back in 2011. We operate somewhat separately, but we do have some of the NBCU data in SmartSimple. So what we track right now is we have our foundation grants in SmartSimple. For Comcast, we are invite only on the application. So in other words, we go out and we solicit and we select organizations that we would like to fund that fit our focus areas, and then we invite them to apply. On the other side, for the NBCU Foundation, Project Innovation is an open application, so it's actually open for any nonprofit to apply. So we have both of those in our system. For our corporate contributions, we were invite only up until I think about March or so of this year, and then we flipped over to an open application. So for our community impact, our headquarters corporate contributions, that is an open application and anyone can apply. For our local field sponsorships, so those are the sponsorships that happen across the nation. Right now they're invite only, but we are looking to apply that open application to them as well. We're actually working on that now and hoping that they can use the same application that we're using for corporate. And then finally, we have what we call, other cash and in kind. So one of our largest, the bulk of our giving is actually our in kind. As a company, we do have a cable division, and we offer free airtime in the form of public service announcements or video on demand. And then we capture that giving as in kind in our system. So we work very closely with our folks at Spotlight, and that's our advertising agency, to kind of track that giving. And then we have kind of everything else that's outside of the foundation and outside of our headquarters corporate contributions. So those are, again, our field contributions or other contributions that might happen outside of community impact. So for example, if our HR decided they wanted to donate $5,000 to sponsor some kind of run or sponsor some kind of event, those we actually intake manually. So we have an application, we send them the link to SmartSimple, and they can go in and say, hey, we gave $5,000 to this organization. So as you can see, we kind of have a mixed bag of everything that's included in SmartSimple, which Mary manages, which is it's a boatload of things that are managed a little bit differently, but Mary's going to walk you through a couple of those. So let's go to the next slide. All right, and I will turn it over to Mary.
Thank you, Shelley, and thank you everyone for joining and listening to our little spiel. I really hope that this can kind of generate some conversations. We will get into the challenges later, but as many of us have learned, SmartSimple does have a lot of improvements. For some people, probably more so. Anyone moving from a lack of database, I think I've seen a huge improvement, but for us, one of the big things was data entry and reporting in one system. Shelley mentioned that we have that big in-kind contingency. That data was previously entered in a separate database, which was the system that was used by our traffic team to manage all those public service announcements and airtime. So now all of that stuff gets entered in our database first, which is great, and we have a back-end integration with them, which is great, but is being worked on to make it even better. The web access was huge for us. We were on GIFS Alta, which is an installed program. We did not have everyone across the country in all of our cable divisions using that program. So now we have very easy access for them no matter where they are in the country, no matter what time of day, which is really excellent. Charitable organization lookup within the system, which I'm sure is great for everyone, but for us, we have a GuideStar login, obviously, but having that IRS database search has been great because we have our field users who no longer have to type in the whole address because they can pull it in from the IRS database. One of the big things was easier for us to fix errors and just configure the interface in general. We didn't really have a lot of flexibility with that with GIFs, as I'm sure some of you may know, and just in general improved troubleshooting. As Shelley said, we launched in January of this year, and at the same day we launched, we also launched our first ever open application for that the former NBCU Foundation Project Innovation, and it was an onslaught. But the great thing was that when we did encounter an issue, we were able to get right on that with SmartSimple. I was able to fix stuff just in response to our applicants having issues. So it was great to kind of be able to have those quick error fixes and also give me the opportunity to put an FAQ document on the open application and put other things on to kind of try to steer and pre-answer a lot of questions people were having, and then just kind of filter out the real technical issues that people had. So it's been really great and definitely a huge improvement for us. And it really allows us to personalize the system to our needs and our users' capacity, which we really didn't have before. So what I want to talk about next, and I'll do the demos that go along with these, but these, as Shelley said, are some kind of outside of the box things that we're doing, we think, with the system. So one of them, as you can see, online foundation approvals doesn't seem particularly outside of the box, but all of our stuff was paper before. We were taking applications in online, but our approvals were all paper. So that is an improvement for us, but probably not for a lot of other people. But I want to talk about some of these customizations we have. So minority-led, minority-serving auto-coding. So just to give you a little background, our annual giving goals include goals to give to specific demographic groups and to increase that giving each year, as many organizations have. So in our organization, that's minority-led, minority-serving organizations, also known as MLMS, and organizations must meet certain guidelines, which were set by our legal department, to qualify as these MLMS organizations. Previously, we used to collect all of this data manually if we got it at all. So we had a nice, fillable PDF form, but the organizations were still filling them out, sometimes printing them out and scanning them, sometimes filling them out online, emailing them back to us. it didn't validate whether or not the totals added up to 100%. It couldn't necessarily require people to fill it out. So now with SmartSimple, we've been able to collect that data from the organizations when they're applying. We also can simply send them an email and direct them to come in and update their organization profile, whether or not they have an application pending. So it's really reduced our manual data entry and coding. But one of the challenges I would say is, as we're kind of learning and configuring the system, how to prevent changes to our legacy data and still doing some tweaking on making that coding work correctly. So I kind of wanted to show you guys how we do that. And I have our lovely formula set up here. So for those of you who aren't familiar, this is a organization category formula. So all of our external organizations have this formula applied to them automatically. So there's a lot of junk in here. Not junk, it's all wonderful, but a lot of confusing things if you're not familiar with the formulas. But if you are, what we've built is, for example, this lovely formula says that if your organization serves, if your board of directors and your staff all make up a percentage of African Americans that is 50% or more, then the organization qualifies as African American according to our guidelines for our minority-led, minority-serving guidelines. We also have this alternate formula, it's all this and or, that says if your board chair is of that ethnicity or your senior staff, lead senior staff is of that ethnicity, then it will qualify. So how does that actually work if you don't understand how to read that formula? So let's go into one of our organizations. Oh, I already had it open over here, actually. So what we're looking at is my lovely test organization. And here is a slightly different view, but a view of, I'm just making sure everybody can see this, the population served data that we collect from an organization. Lots of instructions on this page, but basically, as you can see here, I am coded as verified not eligible. That means I don't qualify as minority-led or minority-serving. However, if I just simply go in here and I, as the organization, say that I do qualify, so I would say that one of my ethnicities is more than 50%. I'm going to fill it in on this one as well. So what we're collecting is their board makeup, their staff makeup, and their population served makeup. And then when I hit save and go back to my coding tab, it is now qualified as African American Black according to our legal guidelines. So this has been great for my colleague Michelle, who is sitting right next to me, who used to do a ton of manual work, literally manually looking up the census data if we didn't receive a form from the organization, going to their website and hoping they had some sort of description or pictures of their board and staff, which, as you can imagine, is not really a qualitative way to track that information. So now we require this information from our organizations. This kind of back-end coding, I don't know if you guys are using it a lot, but it's something that has been very helpful for us because we have all of these kind of institutional corporate guidelines that we need to follow and that are often unique to us. Another thing that we are using is zip code to market auto coding. So the MBCU, as you can imagine, has market areas, designated market areas, or DMAs. So when we launched that first ever open application, we needed to be able to route it. We also needed to be able to prevent people from applying if they were not within one of those market areas. So what we did was, with the help of SmartSimple, we got all of our zip codes, and SmartSimple built a variable for us that assigns all of the zip codes to one market, and then built in a workflow that would code the organization with that market. So what does that look like? That is in our system variables under settings, and I'm in the wrong one. Where is my market? It doesn't say market, it says MBCU. So as you can see here, it's just a series of comma-separated values, and each market has its own chunk, and these are just all of the zip codes that fall into our market, which we got from our research team. And then what would happen is, as an organization, and I should have one on mine, is the organization would come in and register. And as you can see here, my zip code falls into the Philadelphia market. If an organization fell into the Philadelphia market, they, as an applicant, obviously this application is no longer live, so I can't show it to you, but as an applicant, they would be able to see that Philadelphia application. They would not be able to apply to any of the other markets. If I didn't fall within one of our markets, I wouldn't be able to apply because, again, we're only funding organizations within those market areas. So this was a great advantage for us, obviously, the automatic coding, routing it so that anything that was labeled Philadelphia went to our Philadelphia review team. The Florida teams got South Florida, and we were able to separate it by all the NBCU local stations that were doing the reviews. One of the challenges, and kind of an overarching challenge I think that we have with a lot of these variables and these back-end things, is that the organization has to come in and save the profile individually. So they had to come in, they could see the applications, couldn't apply to them until they updated their organization profile, which is fine, but did lead to a lot of questions. So I think one of the things we would love to talk about is collecting that sort of demographic data and what sort of requirements everyone has around collecting that data. So before I hop into that online foundation approval and routing stuff, I would like to kind of talk about that minority-led, minority serving auto coding, more about demographic data collection. So are any of you guys collecting this data in your database, and at what point are you requiring it from your grantees?
So I'm going to jump in here real quick, Mary. So part of why we're asking is that we, as an organization, have goals that we have to meet each year, diversity goals. So one of the challenges is, we need to identify organizations that fit within each of those criteria in the ethnicities or the minority other categories. So we need to identify that before we make a funding decision. So it's, is anyone collecting that information? If so, as Mary said, like, when are you collecting it and how are you collecting it? Because for us, we would like to collect it in advance of making a funding decision. So not saying, if we're going to fund you, can you fill this out? It's like, can you fill this out? But we might not fund you. So we're curious if anyone is doing that as well, kind of collecting MLMS or other information ahead of making a funding decision.
Yes, I'd like to open the floor for questions as well. Is anyone taking this kind of demographic information from Colleen from the Ayola Fund? We collect diversity data as part of an annual report, brackets post-award. We collect it via an XML.
So is that an XML built into SmartSimple? Like a form built into SmartSimple?
Yeah, Derek here, guys. If I can speak on their behalf, I believe it is.
Great, thank you.
Colleen says yes, into a larger annual report.
Got it. But that's not really driving your decision, your funding decision making. It's more after looking at the impact, sounds like.
Yes, that's what correct is what Colleen says.
Thank you, Colleen.
And if I can just interject, guys, just so if we're talking about demographics, you know how you have, I saw you had the U.S. Census tab enabled on your organization records. That's the information that's in the, we integrate with the U.S. Census, so you can, in addition to that U.S. Census tab, I mean, we're presenting it there just as, nice charts and graphs, but all that data, you can actually, there's variables for them, and you can actually pull them in to your, as fields if you needed to as well.
Yeah, actually, that's a great point, Eric. So we actually do have that built in, where if an organization doesn't have all that back-end coding, if the organization didn't provide that, their board and staff stuff to us, we do have something built with the census that pulls that data into the application based on their zip code, their census data. Obviously, that doesn't give us the board and staff information, but it does get us, closer. And that was a good thing for Michelle as well, who does all that data coding, because it's pulling that data, census data in directly. But yeah, I think the census data is great for that, and it's just kind of the collecting any extra organization specific or obviously kind of Comcast specific information that's been challenging for us.
Perfect. And just so you guys are aware, you guys found it's very similar to what we encounter with the financial institutions. They have it's called the Community Reinvestment Act, and a lot of times their granting is targeted to specific demographics. So they tend to look into where the nonprofits are and what demographics they serve, because there's regulations and things that they tie back into those areas.
Great. Do we have, I don't know if anybody on this call was from any of those organizations. I'm assuming not, but that would be great if any one of them are willing to do some knowledge sharing as well.
I'd like to mention the participation of KPMG as well. I missed that in the slide, but I'd like to introduce them as one of the participants for the user group. Hello.
Great, thank you. Another thing, so I think we definitely like to continue that conversation. If anybody's willing to do any other sort of sharing, or if they have questions about how we're tracking that demographic data, we're definitely looking for some best practices in that vein, because we've kind of been tweaking our own way of pulling it for several years now. So it would be great to see if anybody else has had success with it. That last, not really customization, but the last point I wanted to talk about here, online foundation approvals and routing. This is pretty obvious benefits: reduced paper and easier tracking of approval statuses. One thing that I would love to get some feedback on is training those users who like paper, training people that are used to printing everything out, the approvals being printed out, a stack of grant paperwork sent up to our executives. We do have most of our headquarters executives doing their online approvals, but I would love to hear about your experience in getting leadership, or really anyone, on board with these new processes. If you've drastically changed something and put it into the database that wasn't previously on the database, do you have any success stories or maybe challenge stories of getting that sort of adoption to people that are used to the paper? Anyone?
I'd like to add a response from the previous point. Christina from KPMG mentioned that for diversity data, GuideStar has started collecting this data for them at KPMG as well. And they have received a one-time data dump of this based on organization. It's not automated, but they're using it to update their organization list.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, a one-time data dump from GuideStar?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's great.
And yes, going back to your point on reducing paper and leadership adoption on this one, I'm going to try and put someone on the spot here. Hillary from New Hampshire Foundation, can you hear us? I don't think she can hear us right now, but we'll get back to that.
Hi, this is Wendy from New Hampshire Charitable. Hillary wasn't able to be on the call. And I'm going to apologize because I'm at home and we have construction workers, so that's why I haven't been saying much. But as far as, we've done a really good job with getting our leadership to approve applications, and we have committees that approve the applications, and we're pretty good about doing it online. Last year was the first year we did with our committees, and a lot of them still wanted to print out the paper, and then they realized how much paper it is, so I think this year it's going to be better. But as far as our senior staff, we have both boards and the vice president who signs off on certain applications. And I'm going to mute myself again because this is very loud.
Thank you, and wow, that was, poor thing, but I could hear you. That's great to hear, and I think we're hoping for that same thing. We really have kind of one holdout on the paper, and since we're doing these online approvals with other with our other executives up until that point, what we've done is kind of printed out, because he used to see, you know, the signatures previously prior to him. So now what we're doing is printing out the sheet that says, you know, online approval completed by this person at this time, hoping that that will kind of make an impression and say, look, everybody else is doing the online approvals, you can still see everything. But that's would definitely be open to, if anybody wants to shoot us a note or start that conversation offline, that would be awesome to talk a little bit more about that. Because we do have a lot, it's going to inform a lot of stuff. Now we have a couple other things, like Shelley said, we want to bring on, we want to let our field kind of use this online application. We're talking about consolidating some of our payment processing from across all of our cable regions and divisions. So we'll definitely love to hear some other people's tips on getting people on board. So that's kind of all I have for our customizations and things like that. If anybody has any questions about anything I've shown, anyone? Okay, and I'm always open for questions if you have them. And the enhancements and challenges. So again, this is kind of going to be open for us. And I lost my notes. Hold on a second. So some of the things that we kind of like to segue into Q&A. Difference in approval and process flows across giving types. As you saw, we have a lot of types of programs running through the system. We have invite-only foundation applications. We have open invitation or open sponsorship applications. We have other giving types that are entered on the back end, manual internal staff data entry. As many of you may have experienced, we've kind of struggled to manage all of that field visibility between application types and statuses. The foundation applications go through a lot more significant review than the other applications. They both have different sets of approval chains, different people, but a lot of them we're using the same fields. So we've had to do, I think, process-wise, a lot of smart check validation and specific visibility conditions, because we have some fields that our internal staff needs to code when they're doing data entry, but then we have the same fields that during the foundation process, they don't do that coding, so it's not required of them. I don't know if this is a problem that other people have, but we would love to hear more about kind of how you guys have used that, if you've used smart check validation, or if you've kind of streamlined your processes to fit one process, or to fit SmartSimple, to kind of make that maintenance easier. Does anyone have any experience with that? Okay. A couple other things that we have are kind of simplifying data entry for our less, I would say, technically inclined users. We use a lot of instructions and tooltips. I think the biggest headache we have is that organization profile being separate from the application. So I kind of wanted to know if other people are doing that. For example, I showed you that demographic data. And, oh, I see that Colleen gave a response that they use smart check validations in reporting and validating reporting conditions. Okay, that's good to hear. So do you use that in applications at all, or just in that post-award report? Okay, great. Thank you. So Colleen said just in the post-award report. Thank you.
Yeah.
If anybody else has any thoughts on that, again, kind of open, that's kind of one of our key things that we'd like to talk about. One of the things, like I said, that organization profile. We want to collect all this data about the organization, their FLDA, federal lobbying disclosure information, their 990 information, their demographic data, and their basic contacts. We do that all. We have the application, and then we, using validation, tell them they have to update their organization profile. For some reason, this has really been a hang-up for organizations because it's in a separate place from their application. So they don't always make the connection that they then have to go back and submit the application. Is anybody collecting a lot of organization data kind of separate from the application and using that separate organization profile to collect that data? And if you are, or if you aren't, how are you doing that?
I think it's, hey guys, it's Eric here. I think it depends on from what we see from the SmartSimple side. I think for you guys, sort of being in a corporate entity, we see a lot more of that on that side of things, or at the state or federal level. They have they're gathering a lot more of that data on the organization side. We have a RBC Bank here. They do the similar approach to yourselves. Their organization profiles are quite detailed, and before anyone can apply, they do a check, I believe. They're using the Smart Check to see when it was last updated, and if it's past a certain amount of time, they force them to update their organization data first before completing the application. But they also have that separation where it's not part of the application process. They have the organization data plus the application data.
And just to add from the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, they mentioned that they have them validate their profile before they have access to the application.
Great. And Wendy, is that so is that just once a year that they have to update their profile? So for example, we have some organizations that this might not apply to you, but we'll have some that get corporate sponsorship funding and foundation grants. Do you just require one update per year before that application? All right, I'll wait for Wendy to respond. I'm sure she's listening to construction right now. But thank you guys so much. That's really helpful. And I want to be mindful of our time. I think one of the key things, kind of quality control of our data. So we do a ton of QC of data, and we obviously have a lot of data. But as we're kind of learning how to modify, and Wendy just responded, they update every 6 months. So if they're invited, they have to update it. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Quality control of our data. I think some things that we kind of discovered is we have all these workflows. We are building in all of these formulas to do this coding on the organizations and do the coding on the applications. One thing that we've kind of struggled with is kind of learning as we learn how to modify and make these administrative changes, making sure that former data isn't affected. Now, one thing obviously that we have is that the workflows or the formulas are set so they don't trigger on records of a certain type. So anything that's closed shouldn't get changed. But one thing we'd like to hear about is if you guys have a process for making these changes. Like if you're building out a new application grant, or if you're building out a new process or a workflow, do you have any sort of kind of default testing that you always do after making a system change? Obviously that's the best practice, but if you're kind of making tweaks on the fly, it's kind of hard. So I'd love to hear kind of from that back-end database side if anybody has any ongoing testing or regular testing that they do after making changes. And that's probably a little bit more of an in-depth conversation, so if anybody wants to talk about that offline, I'm happy to do that. And then Shelley, I don't know if you want to kind of jump in here on this one, but this is the difference compared to GIFs. So if any of you have used GIFs, but something that we're looking for some workarounds on would be navigating and list views compared to GIFs. We used to use kind of our list views a lot for all of our reporting. I'd love to hear about people who are pulling a lot of organization data. So, for example, if you're trying to pull, we're frequently doing stuff like, okay, we want organizations with an address in PA who have received funding in the past, who've received funding in the past 3 years, or who have a payment in the past 3 years. We can't really go from, I can't search all payment records and search at the organization level. So is anybody doing any sort of frequent organization searching like that, kind of outside of the report builder function, just because we have a lot of users who aren't particularly report savvy who would like to do this sort of searching. Does anybody have any tips on kind of using the list views or maybe making reporting easier for our less technically inclined users?
Mary, we can, while we wait for responses on that question, I'd like to point out that Wendy said for, with regards to getting changes going, they do versioning every year for changes on applications, and that they use the back end a lot for testing.
Okay, great. Thank you, Wendy. And I think we haven't really dipped into the versioning so much just because we just launched, but I definitely would like to talk. Maybe we can connect afterwards about how you're doing that, testing. And thank you, Colleen. I see that you said you use a lot of list views, so I would love to see some of, how you've set things up for your non-tech users. We obviously have a lot of searches and dashboards and things set up, but it would be nice to kind of give them some, I hope, a little bit more freedom to create some things without having us to help them with it. So I really appreciate that.
Speaking about chatting offline, we will be sending the registration list for this user group to everyone who attended, as well as a recording, so that everyone can chat about similarities that they've seen from this meeting. And also, if you'd like to review a few points, you will have that reference as well.
And just in the interest of time, I really would like to make sure we can hear from other folks just beyond the questions that we've asked. So if anybody has any questions about what we presented or any questions for the larger group, I think this would be a great time.
Yeah, any questions from everyone?
Oh, hi, it's Dave at the Smith Family Foundation. How you doing?
Hi.
Hi. So one thing you mentioned early on, charitable organization lookup within the system, does that mean GuideStar is incorporated or something internal to SmartSimple that you can access within the database?
Yeah, so we actually have it two ways. So first of all, we have the IRS lookup. So let me see if I can pull something up really quick. It's a connection to the IRS database, which I believe is just the configuration option on the sign-up pages. At least that's how I've done it. My computer's being a little slow today. But basically, when our field staff is going in and entering organizations, if the organization isn't already in our database, they need to add it. And so in order to add it, they need to click a lookup and it searches the IRS database specifically. So we have it set up, sorry, I have a lot of things happening on my applications. We have it set up so it takes them here, they click search IRS database, and the organization they're adding has to be in the IRS database. Then we also have the charity check, which I'm sure Claudia and Eric can talk to you guys about, but the charity check is GuideStar, and you can just run it off of an organization. This one's not a good example because it's not an actual organization, but we just have it as kind of we have it as a button. So this one doesn't have an EIN because it's fake, but it would run and pull a GuideStar charity check document. So I think that might be a special configuration we have. I don't know. I know that GuideStar charity check is an option, but Eric and them can talk about that.
Yeah, that's built. I mean, it's we integrate like the button there, Mary, but yeah, that just requires some. That's additional cost because you need to register with GuideStar for charity check features. But the same thing, you can get the PDF, and you can also populate any of the fields that they offer from GuideStar into fields from
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so David, that actually pulls in the, the tax status information. So that's been great for our field because, again, then they don't have to go out to GuideStar and pull this information separately if they're already in this database. So we found it helpful.
Yeah, we do them separately. Sounds very helpful.
And then there's also, I'll mention, this is Shelley, we do fund nonprofits that are outside, or organizations that are outside of 501c, so some parks and recreation, or some churches or religious entities, which you won't find in GuideStar or the IRS. So we've actually built in, there's kind of a, what's it called, Mary, an exempt button, where it's like, if you're funding an organization that is not, in the IRS, or that is in this exempt status, click this button and you can kind of bypass that. So they can still fill out their organization information and submit an application. And then we have Michelle on our team who, it will come through and it will say, hey, you have to look at this. So she'll go through and vet that one to make sure, it's eligible.
Mm-hmm. So basically all that is, as far as, I didn't set this one up, but basically what it does is when they click exempt, if it's not in the database, they get a new button. It looks the same, and all they do is enter the information here manually instead of pulling it in from the IRS database. So that's only if it's something that's not in the database, and then we do our separate eligibility review here manually. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah, on many levels. That'll help prevent us from the workaround and also the extra step of GuideStar, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear about how you guys are kind of implementing that, because we have a couple different sign-up pages that we have. This is the internal one. We also have one for our online sponsorship application, the open application. We have all this kind of different stuff floating around. So I know we've been talking with support about trying to consolidate and make sure all of our sign-up pages are doing things properly and identifying duplicates. So would love to hear more about using those as well.
Definitely. Keep you updated.
So does anybody else have any questions or? Okay, so I think we're good, Claudine, unless you want to open it up for anything else.
Sure. I'll just transfer back to my screen just to wrap things up. Can I see my screen? Okay, so just wanted to send some reminders for Block Party New York. I was thinking this should be the next meeting, put some names to faces for the Northeast user group. If you can attend, it's going to be on September 6, 2018 at the Wallace Foundation office. This is just by Penn State. By Penn Street Station. Penn Station in New York. And then lastly, if you still have not registered, Elevate is registration is also open, and it's going to be on October 17th to 19th in Nashville. If you have any questions on how to register for both events, please let me know. And lastly, before we end this, Shelley and Mary, thank you so much for providing us with a very insightful presentation.
Thank you
Claudia, and thanks for hosting.
Yeah, and I would say as well to the other folks who were attending, if you found this useful, because I know we only have a handful of members right now, but if you did find this useful, I think we, spread the word, share what you thought and what you learned, because I'd love to get, to kind of grow this group, because I think the more members that we have, the more effective we can be in sharing best practices.
Of course. All right, thank you everyone for attending, and I hope you all have a wonderful day today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.